All right, what's going on there, friends? I had a fun little idea for a video series we could do. I figured I could go back way back, thousands of posts on my Instagram, and look at some of my old training footage and kind of go over what I was doing wrong, because I was doing a lot of things wrong. I've mentioned on the channel how when I got into training, I immediately fell in love with it. I didn't miss a session. My effort was very good, and that carried me a long way. And I feel like a lot of the time my programming for circumstances considered was pretty good. I didn't really have anybody guiding me through the process of the gym. I can say with all honesty, I am self-taught. And I think via me having access to the internet, being a younger guy, I cobbled together some pretty effective training from a programming perspective. Now, from a form perspective, as you guys are about to see, wildly lackluster. So my hope with this series is as I get better as a lifter, the maybe technical errors I'm making will be a little bit less obvious, and it'll be better practice for you guys to look at and try to figure out what you guys feel I'm doing wrong, especially these first, 3-4 episodes of this, assuming we're just doing a couple per episode. They're going to be glaringly obvious, but nonetheless, I figured we could start from relatively early. So first we can start off with this bench PR of 335 pounds, done as a skinny little fella in my high school gym, spotted by my friend also named Sam. Obviously, you guys can see a lot wrong with this. Not many things are done all that well here. So just kind of going over, if I had someone come to me, they say, hey, Sam, I've been working really hard. I've been following a program, but I feel like my technical execution is really what's holding back my rate of progression. They showed me this video. I would say, you're damn right. This sucks. But let's see what we could do as far as early interventions, right? Because I'm pretty big on this idea that as we get more advanced, our form gets more advanced. If you look at most of the strongest lifters you guys know and follow, they have some embarrassing training footage early in the gym because they didn't wait until their technique was perfect to then add weight. Would they be better off if they had done so had they started in some Russian training system? Potentially, but just the way things work in practical application, we're all training out of enjoyment. These people were really passionate right when they got in the gym. They found they really liked it, and they pushed themselves really hard without waiting for their form. Maybe they didn't know better. Maybe they kind of disregarded it, right? But that's a pretty common thing, and they'll clean up their form as it's necessitated to continue getting better. So when you take a beginner like me here, we're looking to just make improvements to make my technical level match more proportionate to my strength level. We're not necessarily saying deload to a broomstick. You need to display the most perfect IPF world champion type form before we have any desire to overload. It's more of things in tandem. Now here we can see these things are not in tandem. They're kind of disconnected, and I did benefit eventually from dialing back and refining my technique. But early on, we're trying to do these two things at the same time. So easy, low-hanging fruit here. You can see I'm doing a respectable job retracting my scaps. That's kind of step one. The just kind of top down, first thing I see that I could do to make this a lot easier on myself is I could take a maximal breath of air most my lungs could take in prior to getting the unrack and the hand out. And I would do the rep using that first big breath of air, because breathing once you've unracked the weight, usually it's just going to compromise your tightness. It isn't doing much for you. So, that would be something that I could have an athlete like this do without a whole lot of work. It could be just an instant change. I say, hey, young Sam, next time you're doing this, big breath of air right here, take out the weight, control it, stabilize it, bring it down, drive it up. If you want to blow that air out as you're locking out, that's okay, but we want to have this full belly breath of air. We don't want to be breathing mid-rep. That's just going to create an environment of instability, and we're better able to express force when we're in an environment of greater stability. There's a lot of wobbling going on here at the forearm, and you're going to see that's a running theme of my inability to stabilize at the wrist. We're going to talk about this more a little bit later in this series when I started to get it figured out, but this was a combination of where I was placing the weight in my hand and being very lazy in terms of squeezing using the bar, but it was more about fixing the placement in my hand than it was just squeezing the shit out of the bar that fixed that instability at my forearm. Now, if we go down a little bit, what are the scaps doing? Retraction looks respectable, doesn't look excessive. Scapular depression is there, probably could be slightly better, but that's not something I would have an athlete at this level worry about too much. There's more foundational things like the breathing, the bar placement in the hand, and then we get to the lower body, which is a bit of a shit show. This is one of the first things I would look at alongside that breathing, maybe the hand. I would say, hey, you need to get tight through the legs prior to the unrack. You're very relaxed through your lower body here. We want to think about most of our weight being split between up here on our traps and here in our feet. We almost want our butt hovering from the start. The quads are very tensed from the moment we unrack it to the moment we re-rack it. We want to be driving as if we're trying to extend at the knee, trying to slide ourselves towards our spotter, not flexing the glutes and shooting the hips up in the air. Effective leg drive is horizontal rather than vertical. So that would be the first thing, is I would say, hey, from before you start unracking, pin your traps to the bench by pushing up into the weight so they fix in place, and then attempt to slide yourself towards your spotter. And just like if you had a piece of paper on a table and you slid both ends together, the middle of that is going to rise. And that's going to be kind of how you create your arch. That's how we're going to create our tension. And we want to, as the weight approaches our chest, meet it halfway with our sternum and get tighter and tighter through the legs, rather than wait till that bar has hit our chest and then go from relaxed legs to flexing legs. And then we would also probably want to fiddle with what we're doing with our foot positioning, maybe squeeze the bench with our adductors. There's a lot of strategies we can use to try to put our hip already into extension. That way, when we drive real hard when the bar is coming up, our hip is fully extended and our butt will stay in contact with the bench. Here, my hip is not in extension. So when my whole body tenses up, when I start pressing up from the chest rather than earlier, my hips have room to rise here. Whereas if we can orient ourselves in a position where we're already kind of tight and our hip is in a fully extended position, we can flex as hard as we want. It's already fully extended. It's not going anywhere. Now, the next clip we have here is some squatting. My squatting was actually a lot better early in my training career than my benching was from a technique perspective. Based on my training history, having done a million, billion push-ups and dips and pull-ups for boxing, developed this huge work capacity in the upper body, knowing how to recruit muscle fibers kind of explosively in the upper body, my bench excelled relatively quickly ahead of my squat. But I figured out the technique for the squat a little bit better a little earlier. Now, there's not a tremendous amount we can see from this video, but we can see that I'm doing a respectable job creating upper back tightness. We're going to have to look at another video to get a better look at it. It looks as though the brace is probably a bit lackluster here, and I'm kind of relying on the fact that I have strong spinal erectors to supplement the fact that my brace is a little bit lackluster, and I'm not maintaining this extended position through my spine. It's kind of fudging as I stand up. We're getting this little bit of squishing through the torso, which I could get away with because my erectors got very strong very quickly. Now, why did they get very strong very quickly? It's because I did not know how to brace on my deadlift. So this was probably a few weeks after that clip I showed you. I'm not exactly sure. I probably could check that. And this is at the YMCA in Idaho. I actually went here recently. Now, I cleaned a lot of things up here. I had been working on my technique on my squat because they were feeling pretty foreign still, whereas the bench felt not foreign to me. I should have identified that I was terrible at it, but because it felt pretty good and intuitive to me, I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to dig into watching my videos over and over and refining my technique to get better. I thought, oh, if I just put more mass into my primary movers, it'll translate. And it did, but it could have translated a lot faster. So we can look at this, again, kind of top down. If I had an athlete coming to me and they're like, okay, well, I just hit 405 with no equipment on a low bar. What do you think? What do you see in here? I would say, okay, upper back tightness looks pretty respectable. I might try to lock in a slightly more extended position for a skinnier guy because, as you can see, as I come down, I get into a more extended position than I do when I'm standing at the top. And that's a very common thing you will see with people that don't have a massive shelf of upper back musculature. They will unrack their low bar from this rounded over position to feel like they've got control of the bar. And then as they go down in the squat, they'll actually extend. That's probably not the most viable long-term strategy. It's almost better to stand with a little bit more forward lean at the top, but lock in a little bit better position that more closely mirrors this position we're seeing at the bottom. Again, the brace here, this is kind of me using more prior knowledge, really lackluster. didn't have a great understanding of the fact that, okay, we're supposed to breathe not up into the chest. You can see my chest rises, very indicative that I'm breathing high up into the chest. We want to instead try to breathe low into the stomach, and we just want to try to create tension as if we're doing like a front and a side plank at the same time, as if someone's going to come punch us in the stomach. And then we want to pressurize that tension, breathing low into the stomach in 360 degrees. We kind of want to feel that air pushing forward into our abs. We want to feel it pushing sideways into the obliques, and we really want to feel it pushing backwards into our lower back. Now, that sounds very conceptual, but as someone gets more advanced with bracing, they quickly understand, like, no, I can feel exactly what you mean. I can feel that pressure pushing back into the back of my belt, and I can feel breathing sideways into the obliques, and suddenly my lower back takes a lot less of a beating from the same fundamental lower body training program. Now, we can't see the lower body too well here, but a lot of things are being done well here. We're striking a pretty good balance between pushing the knees forward to recruit the quads and hinging at the hips to effectively use the posterior chain to squat as much as possible. So I'm assuming, I can't see them, but I'm assuming I'm doing a pretty good job keeping that weight over my midfoot here and splitting the demands between kind of that anterior and posterior movers. Now, the thing that you can start to get a glimmer of here is my hip stability probably is a little lackluster. The knees flick in probably just a little bit more in magnitude than I'm comfortable with. The knees coming in a little bit isn't the biggest deal in the world, right? The adductor magnus, big muscle on your inner thigh when you're in a deep squat position, acts as a very powerful hip extensor, right? So if your knees like flick in ever so slightly, that might not be knee valgus. That might just be internal rotation of the femur. And all that means is one of these big major primary movers is contributing. Now, what I don't like to see is when that magnitude of knee flick in comes at the cost of even foot pressure. The second that it brings you into the point where all of the weight is on the inside of your foot and not an equal amount on kind of the outer edge of your foot, that's when I would kind of deem it to be a movement deficiency. But you can see I started to kind of get my ducks in a row a little sooner on this lift than the other two. Here we can see a 315 close grip bench press. I've got some ideas here going on in my tiny little teenage brain of, okay, well, I'm going to try tucking my feet under me like I've seen a lot of very good benchers do. I believe this was probably around the time Kirill Sarachev broke the bench press record using a heels up technique. And that kind of gave me this idea of, okay, this is how I can put my hip into extension. This lets me create a little bit bigger of an arch. Okay, I've got some ideas here. They need a lot of refining, as you can see. So poor control in the negative. Probably could have made that easier on myself to slow down that negative a little bit. Maintain a little bit more back tightness as that bar approaches me. Again, drawing the sternum up to meet the bar halfway rather than kind of laying flat until it hits me and then driving. And then the biggest thing is the same thing we talked about in that first video, just with my new heels up setup. I need to have less weight on my butt here when I'm sitting before I start the rep. I need to have weight up on the traps, weight in the feet, and then I need to can keep that tense from the moment I unrack to the moment I re-rack, and think about driving the heels down towards the floor to keep that hip in extension, stop my hips from kind of shifting and driving up. And again, we're trying to meet that bar halfway. You're going to hear that a lot through this series because that was something that I didn't truly understand until a lot later in my training. But when it started to click, it helped me a ton. So here was me in my preparation for my first powerlifting meet. I think I forgot my belt here because I think I knew better than doing a really heavy beltless single to prepare for a heavy belted single. I did have a bit of a grasp on specificity at the time, and I think overall my prep for this powerlifting meet wasn't egregious. Now, was it good? Would I do it very differently now? For sure. But I think it wasn't too bad. And again, you can see some of the things that I identified early that I'm doing well in the squat, which is very funny to say because the squat is the lift I have the least confidence in increasing nowadays. Even though early in my training, it was by far the most proficient of my three lifts. So again, we're creating really good tightness through the upper back. Probably could have slowed down a bit. And this is something I see with a lot of younger lifters. They're just finicky and they're fat, like they're just itching to go, and they walk out too fast and they start it too fast and they descend too fast. Everything is too fast. Just getting comfortable, being more sturdy and stable, and moving a little bit slower with those weights rather than kind of looking like you're being panicky. If you look like you're panicky under a weight, you need to work on that. So I probably could have gotten a bigger brace before the unrack, stood up, let that whip settle because this is a very whippy bar, walk it out, let that, I guess, rebrace, let that whip settle again, and then initiate the negative just a smidge slower to find my midfoot. And I think that I could have made this rep a hell of a lot easier on myself. So we look at the actual squat itself, a lot of room for that setup to get better. Probably should walk out from a slightly more extended upper back position. And you can see here, I don't find that good balance between weight in my forefoot and weight in my heels. I remember these shoes. These were sick. I found these were on sale somewhere. Finding this balance between forefoot pressure and heel pressure. And I think because I rushed that negative and because I didn't have my belt on, I wasn't comfortable hinging with the weight at all, I lost that pressure off of my heels. And that was probably the main error I would have an athlete like this address. Now, here you can see a young, skinny Maxwell. This was another thing I did a lot in my training, was pumping out reps, because while the programming looked pretty good, I understood these concepts of specificity and progressive overload. I need to see XYZ improvements in kind of my total volume markers. I would build volume without too much regard for how specifically they were done. And doing reps in this kind of pump out rep style, I do think did a lot for me in terms of my muscular development. My pecs grew and grew and grew, and my power off the chest grew and grew and grew, but it led to me being a very inefficient bench presser when it came to heavy weights, because I would never be doing reps as it would be for a single, from full start to full lockout, weight, reset, go, would prepare you a lot better. And that's something we also, I would say my technique wasn't too bad, but the massive mistake I made on my squat was doing all of my reps in this constant tension, kind of banging out rep style. And we'll probably touch on this in the next episode, but that actually led me to a pretty big plateau, even though my accessory selection, my variations, my technique was passable. All of these things were pretty good, but because I was doing all my reps in this banged out style rather than treating them each as singles, it wasn't preparing and translating to a new 1 rep max. So this is something you'll see a lot of, is these stupid pump out style reps. I think they definitely can be used as an effective tool. There's some literature coming out now about how bottom end partials might be a pretty darn good hypertrophy stimulus, and I feel I reaped some of the benefits of that, but it wasn't preparing me to get better at what I was doing at the time, which was powerlifting. It was making me bigger and stronger, but not much else. So this has been episode 1. I'll come up with a series name. Thank you guys for watching.